boring history for sleep, how Nubian healers treated toothaches with beer. The fermented cure of the Nubians, medicine along the Nile 3,000 years ago. The quiet art of dental care in ancient Nubia. You're lying still. Your eyes are closed. The world around you begins to fade. Imagine yourself in ancient Nubia, in the gentle valley of the Nile. It's around 1300 BCE. The air is hot and dry, with a faint scent of barley, clay, and dried herbs. The soft buzz of insects mingles with the distant trickling of the river. Here, in this early land south of Egypt, the kingdom of Kush thrives. A quiet, largely uncelebrated tradition of medicine is taking root, practical, humble, and surprisingly effective. There are no gleaming temples of healing, no statues of god-physicians. Just ordinary people relying on experience, observation, and natural processes. One of those processes is fermentation. The village dentist in a clay house. In a small village not far from the Nile, an old healer with a gray beard and a calm voice tends to those in pain. He's not a priest, nor an official doctor in the Egyptian sense, but people come to him when their teeth ache. There are no metal tools or gleaming instruments. Instead, stone mortars, myrrh salves, and above all, clay jars of beer. But not just any beer. This is a thick, almost porridge-like brew of fermented barley and emmer, full of yeast, murky, bitter, and alive. And this is where the story begins. Modern archaeology has shown that the Nubians inadvertently created one of the first known antibiotics in history, streptomyces, a bacterium that thrives in fermented mash. The way this was discovered is a modern story, but its roots lie in the quiet routines of these ancient people. Why toothaches were so common. The people of the Nile loved grain, bread, porridge, beer. But their flour was rough. Tiny grains of sand and ground stone from milling ended up in daily meals. Over time, this wore down teeth drastically, a chronic issue. Mummies from the region show worn down teeth, exposed roots, even jaw abscesses. The pain was real. And the treatment? Quiet, unassuming, but far more thoughtful than you might expect. Brewing the healing beer. The brewing process was a calm, everyday ritual. Barley was soaked in water, lightly roasted, then mixed again with water and poured into large porous jars to ferment. Over several days, the mixture bubbled and frothed, not just producing alcohol, but cultivating microorganisms. Traces of streptomyces were later found in the bones of mummies, suggesting regular consumption. But what does that have to do with toothaches? Here's the quiet genius: this thick beer wasn't just consumed. It was used as a rinse, sometimes even as a mouth compress. The pain lessened. Slowly. Without drama. Just less. The healer and his clay jars. Picture yourself seated on a reed mat in the shade. Next to you, the healer murmurs softly while gently stirring a clay vessel. In another mortar, he crushes myrrh and mixes it into the thick beer. He asks you to take a sip, hold it in your mouth. You taste the bitterness, the fermentation, and after a while, the throbbing pain fades. Maybe it's imagination. Maybe it's microbial action. Either way, the healer says little. He watches. He listens. And you stay until the sun sets. Dentistry without drills. Contrary to our modern image of primitive dentistry, pulling, scraping, pain, the Nubian approach was different, patient, local, and pragmatic. There's evidence of honey-based pastes, sesame and salt salves. All applied directly, all relying on observation. And all without metal tools. The goal wasn't to cure instantly, it was to soothe over time. Did they know it was medicine? Did the Nubians know their beer was medicinal? Likely not in the modern sense. But they knew it helped. That the thick drink did more than intoxicate. That it, quietly, eased pain. And that's perhaps the most fascinating part of this story, that daily, humble habits had medical benefits without needing explanation. How much of this knowledge was intentional, and how much was the quiet wisdom of centuries of repetition? Section 2, Between Fermentation and Faith, the Quiet Wisdom of Nubian Healing. Imagine waking up in a thatched mud brick hut. Morning in Nubia is bright and still. The sun rises slowly over the horizon, casting golden light across the river valleys. Insects resume their buzzing, and outside, the day begins with steady, quiet activity, grain being pounded, clay being scraped, palm fronds rustling. Today, you're returning to the healer. The ache in your jaw is lighter now, but not gone. So you make your way back to him, along dusty paths, past donkeys, children, and the faint smell of fermenting grain and dried fish. The healer is part of the community. The healer is not a distant magician. He is part of village life, immersed in the daily rhythm. His practice isn't about secrets, it's about repetition, observation, patience. In Nubia, there was no sharp divide between medicine, food, and belief, it was all part of one continuous cycle. Unlike the rigid medical system of Egypt with its specialist doctors and formal prescriptions, Nubian knowledge was practical, family-based, and often passed down orally. The healer was usually an elder, man or woman, with deep knowledge of plants, foods, and bodily signs. Learned not through schools, but through life. Medicine was everywhere. The medical world of the Nubians was shaped by the river and the seasons. When the Nile rose, certain plants were harvested. When it fell, salves from resins were prepared. Medicine wasn't separate from life, it was woven into it. Beer was just one remedy. Others included myrrh and frankincense, dissolved in fat to treat gum inflammation. Clay and diatomaceous earth, for wound cleansing. Honey, used not just for sweetness but as an antibacterial salve. Acacia bark, chewed to reduce gum swelling, slightly astringent. These methods worked, not spectacularly, but effectively. And if they didn't cure, they comforted. Sometimes, that was enough. Learning through repetition. How do you learn that something heals? Not through a theory, but through repetition. The healer knew, if someone rinsed with myrrh beer for 3 days, the pain eased. He had seen it in others, and in himself. He didn't ask why, only how often, when, and under what conditions. Over generations, this built a quiet but reliable system. One that worked not by innovation, but by careful adjustment. There were no records, but there were stories. When your grandfather had a toothache, the beer with ash helped. You should try it too. What archaeology found. Thousands of years later, archaeologists uncovered the traces of these practices in Nubian graves. Mummies with worn-down teeth showed surprisingly few signs of fatal infections. Some skeletons even contained chemical residues of tetracycline, an antibiotic produced by the same Streptomyces bacterium found in Nubian beer. Even more intriguing, children and young adults also had traces of it. This means that consuming medicinal beer wasn't rare, it was common, even normal. A research team at Emory University confirmed it. Using wild yeast, open fermentation, and warm conditions, they recreated the beer and found rich colonies of antibiotic-producing bacteria. Trust in the elements. Nubian healing didn't rely on substances alone, it trusted the body's own rhythms. Rest was part of treatment. If you had a toothache, you weren't told to work, you were told to sit in the shade, keep your head cool, sip bitter brews. These instructions weren't written down, they were lived. Sometimes the healer didn't even visit. A child brought the beer mash and a message: drink 3 times. Spit on the 3rd. It was quiet, almost invisible, and because of that, it worked. Between gods and fermentation. Belief also played a role. The Nubians honored local spirits and their own deities, but also worshipped Egyptian gods like Isis and Anubis, especially in matters of health and death. Beer wasn't just brewed, it was sometimes blessed. Words were murmured, jars were left under specific stars, amulets were tied to the vessel. But even these rituals didn't aim for miracles, they aimed for balance. For order. For calm within the body. Belief enhanced the remedy, but didn't replace it. How many other medicines in history were discovered not through theory, but through quiet patience? Section 3, From Pain to Wisdom, What the Nubians Knew About Healing. You're sitting once more beneath an acacia tree, on the edge of a small Nubian village. The air is warm, but not stifling. The pain in your tooth, once sharp and pulsing, is now little more than a shadow. And as you slowly chew a piece of date bread, you recall your first visit to the healer. The treatment was nothing special. A thick brew. A bit of myrrh smoke. A quiet voice that made no promises. And yet, it helped. You begin to understand, in Nubia, healing was not spectacular. It was quiet, steady, and deeply woven into the rhythms of daily life. Women as healers. One often overlooked truth in archaeological accounts: Nubian medicine was shaped equally by women. Especially older women, grandmothers, midwives, family caretakers, held vital medical knowledge. She knew the right leaves for stomachaches, how to cool inflamed gums with roasted flaxseed, how to pack fevers with cold clay. Her medicine was simple, but powerful because it came from generations of observation. No one healed alone. If someone had a toothache, they were cared for, not as a patient, but as part of the social rhythm. Medicine was an active connection. Death as part of healing. But sometimes, healing failed. A tooth became a wound. A wound became infection. Then came another kind of wisdom, the wisdom of dying. In Nubian belief, death wasn't the end, it was a passage. And this too had rituals. The same bier that soothed your pain might now be placed in your grave. Not just as symbol, but as part of life. One last piece of the everyday, carried into the beyond. Nubian graves are modest but telling: little jugs, bundles of herbs, tiny wooden combs, crusts of barley bread, all signs of a life not defined by grandeur, but by quiet endurance. The quiet triumph of practical medicine. What does this story of beer and toothaches teach us? First, medical effectiveness doesn't always require modern knowledge. The Nubians didn't know about bacteria. Yet they healed with a living medicine. Second, patience, observation, and everyday practice can be more powerful than theories. Third, healing isn't always about urgency. Sometimes it's about repetition. About being present. About time. A modern rediscovery. Only in the 1980s did researchers fully realize what the Nubians had done. Skeletons from Nubian tombs were analyzed and found to be rich in tetracycline, a potent antibiotic. It was in the bone marrow, tooth enamel, even skulls. And it all came from beer. Scientists recreated the recipe. With open fermentation and wild yeast, they brewed a bitter, thick beer. It worked. The bacteria grew. The antibiotic was there. The Nubians hadn't just stumbled onto something. They'd sustained it, quietly, through culture, through habit. And maybe that's the point: their medicine wasn't just in the substance, it was in the method. In the waiting. In the care. What remains? When we think of pioneers in medicine, we think of Hippocrates or Galen. But in a quiet Nubian village, without scrolls or glory, people healed pain with fermented mash and patience. No great discovery, just centuries of quiet understanding. Perhaps that's the real foundation of civilization, not breakthroughs, but repetitions. Knowing something helps, even without knowing why. And having the willingness to watch, to listen, to wait. Maybe, the next time you sip beer, you'll think of the Nubians, and their quiet art of turning pain into patience.